Okay, we're to the last module of Unit 2, and Module 14 is going to deal with ecological succession. And you should get used to seeing images like this. This is a classic question that's asked on every single APES test somewhere. I think last year there was actually an FRQ on this, and I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but they had essentially this picture and asked lots of questions. It was not last year, it was the year before, but they asked lots of questions about succession, and you needed to understand what primary succession was. And so make sure that you really understand the difference between primary succession, and on the next page we have secondary succession. That's a really important, you should understand the differences that come into play there. So with primary succession, we end up getting things that are called pioneer species. And that is because with primary succession, somehow the soil has been destroyed. So I like to think of the classic example of the volcanoes on the Hawaiian Islands, where they are pushing out lava. That lava is so destructive to the soil, it actually is so hot that it kills the microbes that are in the soil. And so now we end up with just rock, the black volcanic rock that you've probably seen in pictures, or if you've been to Hawaii, I'm sure you've seen the basalt or the black rock, lava rock fields, pumice and other types of lava rock. Okay, well, anyway, we end up with these things called pioneer species that move in, and pioneer species are the first living organisms that can come in and they break down the rock and turn it into nutrient-rich soil over time. And so that is the major difference between primary and secondary succession. Secondary succession kind of starts here. So we have a disturbance come in, flood, fire, something like that. And then it kind of starts where these small plants start growing, or if you've ever cleared an area of trees, you'll eventually see that will become, if you just kind of leave that dirt to allow something to grow, that's going to be secondary succession that happens, and we end up with a dirt patch that becomes a wildflower field that eventually trees start to grow in it, and we end up eventually having a forest there at some point. Okay, so that's secondary succession. The big difference is there. Make sure you read through that. I didn't explain it all, and so make sure you understand that. There's also some vocab words that go along with this. This graph is a key graph that they like to have you read in terms of succession. So they'll say there's an event, and now we've got all this stuff happening. Which of these things would be considered the pioneer species? Or at what point have we reached the climax community? Okay, so there's lots of different questions that they'll have involving graphs and you reading data from graphs for succession. Okay, another key point here is figure 14.5 and 14.6. Again, read through those and make sure that you understand what those are trying to tell you. That's really important. Again, lots of graph reading for succession. That's something that AP likes to do. You should also understand what a keystone species is. We're going to watch a video on the wolves in Yellowstone if we haven't already watched it by the time you've seen this video. But you should understand and you should know a couple of examples of keystone species. So wolves are one example, beavers are another example in aquatic or wetland ecosystems, and then coral is another example in an aquatic ecosystem. So now you've got a terrestrial example, a aquatic example, and a wetland example. Wetlands are really, they like to ask questions about wetlands in APES all the time, as I've mentioned in the past. Okay, so keystone species, that's important to know. And then you should also understand what an indicator species is. And so this section kind of will explain that to you. Some examples of indicator species, I've already talked about frogs and different amphibians, salamanders and such. And then also macroinvertebrates. And so macroinvertebrates are large enough to be seen with the naked eye, but they're basically insect larvae that we can find in freshwater ecosystems. And so those are indicator species of how how good of quality the water is in an environment, whether or not there's pollutants and things like that. Okay, again, at the end of these units, I feel like this page right here, when they give that 2-page spread, kind of summarizes the entire unit, and it gives you great examples of each of the concepts that were used throughout the unit. So these 2 pages are like one of the best things I've seen in a textbook throughout all the classes I've taught over the years. This is just a great way to sum up the unit and give you lots of great examples, which is a key to doing well on the APES test. Okay, so make sure you look through this. Let me know if you have any questions. There's great review at the end of the unit. I'm not sure if I went through that before, but you can also do some data analysis, which is really important for the APES test. They'll do concept explanation here. This is actually really good. When I read through that, I decided that you all should probably read through that. If I might make you do it in class, we'll see. And then there's always a review test at the end. Key terms that you should know for the test. You should be able to go through each of these terms and sort of explain what they are. And then here's a practice test for Unit 2. And I think that's it. That brings us to the end. We're going to be talking about populations, both human populations and ecosystem populations, wildlife populations in our next unit. So I'll see you all for Unit 3.